All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody here checking out GitHub Universe. So my name is Isaac Levin. I'm here with my friend Abel Wang. We're here to talk about DevOps. So, get your questions asked. We'll answer them for you. Just have general conversation about, what DevOps actually means. I think Abel and I probably have differing opinions. But at the end of the day, we're going to teach some folks how to do some cool DevOps things. You want to say hi, Abel?
Hey, how's it going, everybody? Super excited to be here.
Awesome. So, while people are trickling in, we can just kind of chat, right? So,
Sure.
DevOps, right? I think DevOps is this thing where a lot of people have heard the word and a lot of people probably don't know what it totally means. So what is your definition of DevOps?
So to me, DevOps is something very specific, right? And this is like Microsoft's official definition. But ultimately, for me, DevOps is the union of people, process, and products to enable the continuous delivery of value to our end users. So I said this crazily, super carefully, right? For two reasons. Number one, the person that came up with this definition is literally my manager, which means if I mess it up, there goes my bonus, right? And I kind of like the bonus.
I was about to say, I feel like I've heard that exact phrase word by word a lot. So for the folks who don't know, that term was phrased by Donovan Brown, who is I guess you could say he's what a DevOps celebrity. Would Donovan call himself a DevOps celebrity?
I don't think he would call himself that, but we can call him that.
Yeah. Okay. That's even better. Yeah. So DevOps is interesting for me, as I've been a developer my entire career, and I think one of the things that's very interesting that I find captivating about DevOps is that it puts more responsibility on the developer traditionally, but it also means that you have more autonomy as it pertains to being able to get your stuff done. So for instance, I remember, and you probably remember as well, being a developer at an enterprise somewhere, and it was, okay, I need to get my code from one place to another, and you'd have to go through some potentially archaic process to go from point A to point B. There was lots of people in the room. You had CAB meetings or all sorts of funny things like that, and it involved people that were completely outside of the developer realm. And what does DevOps do to, I guess, make that process more efficient?
It does it in a lot of ways, right? So I do remember back in the day when we had those meetings and stuff, but dude, I am so old because I'm older than you. I'm so old. I remember when my DevOps pipeline used to be super fast and just one person. It was me, right?
Oh yeah.
I would literally just log onto a web server using my network credentials. I would copy whatever files I needed over, and then sometimes I'd have to mess with the registry, do whatever I needed to, and eventually my app would run beautifully.
Yep.
And of course, I created everyone else's app, but my app was running great on the web server.
Yeah, and I remember that time too. And your company was sophisticated if the first thing that you did was you put a maintenance little sign when you have an outage, right?
Right.
That was the funniest thing. It's like a little guy with a shovel or whatever. It's like under construction, and then 16 people would stand around one person's desk and be like, "Is it done yet? Can we turn it back on? Can we turn it back on?" Yep. And you're sitting there sweating bullets. And now, obviously, that's the past. And DevOps is a very interesting thing now because it's not just about making things more efficient. It's about opening up the process to be more successful for customers, right? So the big piece of that people probably think of when they think of DevOps is, the CI/CD, right? The continuous integration and continuous delivery piece of it, right? And I think that, for all the folks that are checking out GitHub Universe, does GitHub have any of those things? Does GitHub do those CI/CD things?
It can do CI/CD. It can do a lot of things, right? Funny you should mention that, Isaac. But I've been playing with GitHub Actions a lot, clearly, right? Because of where I work and what I do. But I think it's freaking amazing, right? So Actions, for those that don't know or don't care about the DevOps space, Actions is GitHub's automation engine, right? You can automate, or their workflow engine, where you can automate just about anything that happens inside of GitHub, including things like CI/CD. And with the recent announcement of their deployment features, right, with the, their environments and the approvers between environments and the workflow visualization stuff, that really has turned Actions to me from just kind of like, oh, you can do automations with it and it does CI really well, to now I look at it as, does it do CI/CD? My answer is yeah, with those new beta features, you really can do CI/CD, like full-fledged CI/CD using GitHub Actions.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important thing to call out, right? Because before these announcements that just came out in the last couple of days, so there was a lot of like one line automation, right? Where you can kind of do like one thing and there wasn't any stops in the middle, right? And I think now we're starting to see more ability for gating, more ability to do, manage things that allow us to control, where things go. Still have automation. Automation is great, but full automation is scary, right? And I think having something in the middle to have some sort of, approval process or, checks and balances is really, really valuable, right? And one of the things I think is really, really cool about GitHub Actions is that it's integrated immediately into your GitHub repository, right? So, the idea of having to go somewhere else to configure your CI/CD, it's no longer a thing with GitHub Actions, right?
Right, you can do it straight inside of GitHub, right? And it's pretty slick too, because I mean it's YAML based, like most modern CI/CD systems are these days. I'm not a huge fan of YAML. I think it's a giant pain in the butt to use, but my caveat is the benefits that you get with using a YAML-based system that you can check into source control is ridiculously huge. And the schema that they use, it's about as clean of a CI/CD or workflow automation YAML schema that I've seen. Like it's cleaner than just about any other system that I've done. And I touch all of them. That's my job. So I'm kind of a huge fan. Hey, we got a question, man. This is cool. An interesting one too.
Yeah, how does security factor into DevOps? Well, I will give my 2 cents, and then a DevOps expert like Abel will actually give the real 2 cents. So my thought about security is very interesting with DevOps, right? Because as we build applications, I think the goal is to have them as robust and scalable as possible, like all those buzzwords, right? And a lot of people forget about the security piece. A lot of people think about the security piece towards the end as they get closer and closer to shipping. But what I think DevOps allows you to do from a GitHub's Actions perspective is configure security right at the beginning, right? Being able to start, okay, I'm building out my pipeline here, my workflow, and it gives me the ability to say, okay, do I need to do scanning of secrets? Do I need to do scanning of containers? Do I need to do scanning of all sort package management, things like that, right? I think that, security is one of the pillars of DevOps, to the effect that like a new term was coined a year, 2 years, 3 years ago, DevSecOps, right? Like you want to have this idea of very, very secure DevOps, because let's face it, when you're throwing code all over the planet, right? Whether it's, in clouds or locally or, to all sorts of different SaaS services, your code is just being put somewhere. And if you're not fully secure, it could potentially be a bad day for you.
Oh yeah, seriously. Yeah. And that was a great answer, because I kind of agree with every bit of it, right?
Kind of though.
So security is absolutely vital, right? And in today's world, it's more important than ever, right? We don't want to be the next. I shouldn't bring up other companies' names. So you don't want to be that next headline of we just leaked X million passwords and private user. You don't want to be.
We can't name the company, but we can name the website, right? You don't want to be on I'veBeenPwned.com, right? You don't want to be there. So we got another. So did you want to say anything else about security before we move on to some other questions?
Yeah, I was just going to say, especially now that we have these pipelines, right? It's scary, because I can check in code and within a couple of minutes, it can flow all the way out into production. Yep. Granted, it can go through gates, it can go through approvals, whatever, but it can reach production really, really easily. So people naturally have the fear of, am I just pushing security holes into production at a ridiculously crazy pace? And if you think about the way that we used to handle security was we would try to bolt it on at the end. We would write code. When we were finally done, we would throw like 10,000 lines of code over to our security auditing team. They would audit our code, and it would take them, weeks, months to do?
Yeah, a long time.
And when they were done, they would find problems, we'd go fix it, iterate, and eventually we'd publish it, right? So if we are trying to push code into production multiple times a day, or like 2 times, or I don't know, once every 2 weeks, or whatever the cadence is, how are you supposed to handle security, right? Yep. So the answer is the same thing that we did with quality. Instead of trying to bolt security on at the end, you need to shift left and build security into your application as you are writing it, right? Yep. So like what you were talking about, every time I check code in, And even before I go into the master branch now, I can do like a pull request or a code review, right? While I'm doing that, I can kick off a build. That build can compile, run all of my unit tests, and it can start doing all sorts of different security scanning, right? That's where you add security. In a lot of ways, if you do DevOps correctly, and I know the term is DevSecOps, but whatever, it's all just DevOps. If you do DevOps correctly and you build security in as you're writing your code, you end up with a more secure application than the way we used to do it, which is just throw it over the fence when we were done.
Yeah, and as we wrap up this, I just want to make one comment. There's a reason why, it was always security was tacked on to the end, right? It's because you want, as a developer, you want to get your stuff done. And if you added additional security steps into kind of your code it made your inner loop, that phrase of like basically getting code from an idea or that feature from code to development to up, made it longer. But now, like I had this thing that I tell people all the time when I talk with customers or when I talk with colleagues, right? The second that the code leaves your box, it needs to be as secure as it is when it's going into production. Right? So you can make code, you can do everything that you want locally, but the second you check that code in, that code has to be secure enough that if it was to go to production, it's not going to be a big problem. Yep. So that's kind of how I phrase it. And I think that a lot of people kind of agree or tack on to that idea. So we got another question. So does GitHub Actions support the approval process? So I think we talked about this a little bit earlier, right? So there were some announcements.
But I'm so excited about
Yeah, right? So let's talk more about those announcements.
Yeah, so the answer is absolutely 100% it does. It's in beta right now. They just announced it. So what they've announced is announced environments and also release features, right? So what are the release features? With the environments, you can set up environments and then you can set up some protection rules around your environments, including things like approvers. So you can have a list of approvers or you can list or teams as well. So yes, you have approval gates, manual approval gates before your environments. And it's pretty easy. And if you're curious about how to really do that, I have a blog post on the Azure DevOps blog right now that walks you through step by step exactly how to set that up.
That is awesome. And I think, this is just the start too, right? Like, so and let's be clear. Like there are some other tools that are probably a bit more mature in this process, right? But like this is just the start of adding these additional features into GitHub Actions, right? So I think, one of the things that's very, very important is to define what a proper workflow looks like, right? So the automation process. And now we're starting to see the more, I don't want to use the term enterprise, but I'm going to use it anyway. The enterprise features, right? Of being able to, add additional steps, add additional checks, add additional approvals and steps and things like that in order to make sure, again, like we talked about security earlier, making sure that your code is one, it's going to do the right thing every single time. Two, it's not going to break a bunch of stuff. And three, that it's secure so you don't risk the chance of, potentially causing damage somewhere. Yeah. And I see that we have another question in here, and I think this question is very, very true. It says, your demo seemed awesome for Node. Will it be possible in other languages like Python in the future?
And the answer is yes. Actually, right now, if you remember my demo, I pulled up the page that had all the accelerators. So we have accelerators for Node and also other languages. Oh, Isaac just dropped a link.
I just put it in the chat, right? So
Very
right
cool.
in there. So if you go out to that site, so that's the site that the Azure team has built out for a handful of different services and languages, right? So we have sample apps that exist for obviously Node, we have it for .NET, Python, Java, Docker situations, even AKS, which is Azure's Kubernetes service, right? So these things already exist and are available for you in GitHub. And the best thing is they're GitHub templates, which means you literally just click a button and it completely takes that entire repo, copies it over, including all of the workflows and everything configured correctly, and then you're just good to go. I mean, that makes, I can't imagine a situation where it's easier to get your code where you want it if you have like the whole soup to nuts experience already moved over for you.
Yeah, it makes the getting started experience so freaking nice, right? I think a lot of people don't, or a lot of devs, and that's ultimately what I am, is I'm a dev. A lot of us don't want to think about DevOps because it's kind of a pain in the butt to set up, right? Things like the GitHub accelerators that we have for Azure, it just kind of makes it a one-click thing. I click it, it creates for me my repo with the sample app. I can run it, make sure everything looks good with my sample app, and then just drop my code into the app folder, and I can start running, right? That's what makes it really, really cool. As a dev, I don't have to worry about, oh, how do I set this up? This is going to be so hard. Therefore, I'm just not going to do it right now. I'll just right-click and publish, or yeah. You no longer have that excuse because it's easy.
Yeah, no, exactly, spot on too, right? And I think one of the things that's really awesome out of the accelerators is that it's just not, okay, deploy my code, right? Like these accelerators also, they build the infrastructure, they build out your infrastructure, they provision all of that. They run different scans to make sure that you're meeting particular policy constraints on your Azure subscriptions. It's literally not just a, okay, like take this code and then do an automated right-click publish, which is what you're kind of talking about, right? Or, you know, just a manual or just an automated deployment that just throws things out there. I think it is closer to what the real life experience is of people that actually want to make use of some of these services right in the cloud. So I think it's super awesome.
Yeah, you made a really good point too when you said, you know what, it even provisions the infrastructure that you need up in Azure before it deploys your app into that infrastructure. That right there is so incredibly cool, right? And the way it does that is by using infrastructure as code. So if you use the accelerator, not only do you get a sample app, but you get the infrastructure as code files that describe exactly the environment that you want provisioned up in Azure. So of course, for Azure, we're talking about ARM templates. It has all those ARM templates, and the workflow already has steps that say, hey, go provision this for you, right? That's freaking awesome. The amount of power that you get, the power and flexibility that you get by using infrastructure as code within your pipelines, I can't stress that enough. In fact, I spent all of last year really pushing just how powerful infrastructure as code can be.
I mean, and at least in the Node example that you showcased in our video, is one of the things that was really, really cool is that one of the things I absolutely love about infrastructure provisioning is the ability to when you're going through the review process of pull requests, right? Like I don't even remember, like, before doing this, how you had quality environments and staging environments and QA and test environments, and somebody had to manually push constantly to those, right? But now it's a matter of, okay, pull request is open, gonna spin up some infrastructure that has that change in it. You can review it. Once the pull request gets merged, all of that stuff just gets taken down. So you don't have to worry about managing it anymore. So there's no longer people that have to do Windows patching on servers, on web servers that get used like 4 times a year. There's people that don't have to make sure that they have enough SAN disk space. I remember when we used to have things like, how much disk space are you using on that web server? It's like, I don't know. But now you can just spin up, tear down just as easily as that, just in the scope of a pull request, which is awesome. Yeah,
that's so powerful, right? I issue a pull request. I kind of want to see that code running before I approve it, right? And before, if I had to set up my own infrastructure, if I had to deploy, that's a lot of freaking work to maintain. Let alone, most companies don't have an unlimited amount of money where they can just have virtually like an infinite amount of environments that's just sitting there waiting, right? But now it's super cool. You create the pull request on the fly, you provision what you need, deploy your application into that infrastructure, look at it, approve the pull request, and then it tears it down, right? So you mentioned that. That right there is super powerful, because now all of a sudden you're testing out every single aspect of your pipeline, including the provisioning, the configuring, and all of that good stuff as well. Super powerful stuff. Again, I cannot stress how much I love infrastructure.
Abel, I can tell you're getting a little bit excited talking about DevOps right now.
It's kind of my thing. It's kind of my thing.
I mean, well, I think your enthusiasm is really contagious. I will say that. So we got a question that I think that I'm just going to just ask and then answer really quick, right? So we use both. So one of the folks in the line asked, we use both AWS and Azure. Would your demo work for AWS? The short answer is no. The long answer is, could you make something similar using AWS? Yes. So I think that's, so again, the Azure accelerators that exist, they're created by the Azure team, so they're going to work best in Azure, and I can guarantee you they will not work in AWS out of the box. All right, so next one, for deployment to the variety of various cloud technologies, is there a roadmap for supporting the various different deployment topics? So when I hear deployment topic, I don't really know 100% what they mean. So do you maybe have an idea of what they're speaking about?
I am not sure. So whoever asked that, could you give us a little more detail?
Yeah, so I mean, maybe when they're talking about deployment topics, then maybe they're talking about different ways of deployment. Maybe like red-green deployment, maybe canary deployments, rings. Maybe that's what they're talking about, right? So so let's just go with that. If the person says that's not what I wanted, they'll let us know in this chat, hopefully. So in the situation where you don't want to do like one push to production, right? You want to maybe have like a set of pilot users, or you want to be able to test in a smaller scope your changes in a real life production scenario, but not affecting all of your users. So those concepts, those deployment concepts, right now, there's a few of them that are supported by GitHub Actions, but not all of them, right? So I think a lot of them are very dependent on how you want to configure your service that you're end up being deploying to in Azure, right? So for instance, staging slots versus production slots, right? So with staging slots in Azure App Service, you have the ability to say, okay, 25% of my traffic goes to this slot, the other 75% goes here, right? So those things that you can do on the Azure side. And then you can configure your GitHub action to deploy code to a staging slot. And then that's how you could test out your particular things. Does that sound about fair, Abel, or am I completely off by that?
So I love what you're talking about, because that's very, very DevOpsy. I don't know if that's what they mean about deployment topics. I really don't know, but I'm glad you brought that up, because ultimately Azure App Service is one of my favorite services in Azure. And I know it's not as just all out sexy like Kubernetes and all that right now, but it just works, and it works really easily. And the fact that an app service has slots makes it so powerful, especially from a DevOps perspective. You can start using those slots by doing some very advanced DevOps techniques, right? Things like what you were talking about, like blue-green. You can even do like blue-green environments, or I love what you're doing, which is kind of like what you do with like ring deployments, but okay, you're just going to route some of your traffic using the new code, and then most of your traffic, your old code. You can control all of that with the Azure CLI, which means I can set up my GitHub Actions with lots of different environments, where each environment I can bump it up 10%. Then the next time, 20% of my traffic goes to the new code, and 80% goes to the old code. And then if I approve that, then maybe I can slowly increase that as well. So you can totally automate this, so it's completely like burned into your pipeline. There's just so much cool stuff that you can do.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I love app service too. I think it's just because I've been a web developer my entire career, right?
Yeah, me too.
I mean, I understand the sexiness of containers. But I also tell people all the time that containers aren't for everybody. But what I think is great about app service is that if you want a more traditional web server approach, you have that. If you want containers instead, you also have that. You can deploy containers to app service, right?
You can.
And as somebody who has gotten more and more familiar with Docker, as I continue to play around with things around my house, is the ability to just spin up, spin down things is super, super awesome. And being able to throw it out into a scalable solution automatically, like app service, without having to do a lot of the sliders and knobs that exist with some of the more advanced things like Kubernetes or container registry, container services, or things like that. You have that PaaS service experience, right? We talk about PaaS all the time, right? Like, don't care about the server anymore, unless I have to, and I can manage a little bit of it, but not if I don't need to.
Yeah, but I really don't want to, right? I don't want to care about my server at all.
Yeah,
I just want my stuff to run and run well, and then I just want it to scale.
Yeah. So we have a comment, and I'm a bit confused by the question, unfortunately, but it says GitHub now is VCS plus Artifactory plus Jenkins plus SonarQube, which is very exciting. What is roadmap visions for GitHub? What I assume is that when they say the first GitHub, they have a name of another service, which I don't know what that is. So unfortunately, I really can't answer that. If you want to chime in and say GitHub actually equals some other tool, I will be more than happy to chat about that. So somebody says already deployment topics in Azure, you have ADUF, logic apps, functions, etc. Similar for AWS, right? So as we were talking about it a bit earlier, so the existing GitHub Actions for Azure that we have, they deploy to all sorts of different services. You can deploy to functions, you can deploy to AKS, you can deploy to all sorts of great places, right? Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things that's really valuable is take a look at some of the existing actions that exist. And these are just starters, right? Like if you need to modify them, you can. If you need to do more than just what's provided in that particular pre-built workflow, Abel said something that I think is very, very cool. Azure CLI. So because in GitHub Actions, they're just runners, right? Where you can do anything on them. You can run bash scripts. So if I need to run CLI, like Azure CLI, create this thing and then do a bunch of other things like you would like in a script typically in a different environment, easy peasy. Like it's just Azure CLI this, Azure CLI that, Azure CLI push, whatever, and you're good to go, right? So if your needs for deployment are available in the Azure CLI, you can literally do that exact same thing inside of GitHub Actions.
Yeah, you make a fantastic point, Isaac, which is, right now, the Azure team has created, what is it, 50 some actions, something like that? Yeah, around that, right? So there's like 50 some actions that you can use in your GitHub Actions workflows. But clearly there's more things that you can do in Azure than there are actions for. Yep. But it's not that big of a deal because ultimately, like Isaac was saying, you can use the CLI. So this is the approach or the technique that I use for any type of pipeline that I create for using any tool, not just GitHub Actions, not just Azure DevOps Services, for any DevOps tool set that I use. When I think about building and deploying, my first thought goes to how would I do this manually from the command line? Right? Because if I can teach myself how to do the steps from the command line, I can teach my CI/CD system how to do the same thing. And when you look at a runner like GitHub Actions, you're literally running command line calls one after another, after another, after another.
Very true.
If we have actions that are already published, that's awesome. Use it because it's easier, right? You just use the action, fill in the properties, and you're done. If there isn't, then I start thinking, oh, how would I deploy this using the Azure CLI? Because you can do everything with Azure through the CLI. Right? That's just how we design it. So then, once I figure that out, it's just a command line script, right? Which I just drop into my action. So yeah, you can do anything. So deployment topics, you can deploy into any topics, whether we have created a official action or not. The cool thing is after you do that, it's super easy for you to wrap that up and turn that into your own custom action and then throw it in the marketplace.
Yeah.
And now you contribute to the community.
Exactly. And I think so. I know that we're, DevOps is the topic here, but I just want to talk about some of the cool things you can do, I guess, that aren't DevOps related as we have a little bit of time left, right? So GitHub Actions, it's not just about, like, we talk about it as being like that CI/CD, that DevOps, tool, but it does so many other things that are just like on the outskirts of automation, right? So like, for instance, like one of the things that I do is if I write a blog post, I actually have, as a part of my GitHub action, that when I create a new blog post and commit it into my repository, not only does it deploy it up to my blog so that the actual blog post is actually visible, but then it does automatic tweeting, and I post to Reddit and I post to LinkedIn automated, right? And those are all using actions that exist in the workflows that exist in the marketplace already. So it's talking about not just that top level, like get my code from point A to point B. It's all these other things that you'd have to do when you do a deployment, right? Like something also that's very cool with that you can do is that you can start and stop services in Azure, right? Like using the CLI, we talked about it, right? So for instance, if I need to take down my server to do a particular deployment, I can do that. I can make my coding change and then do a re-up, right? There are so many different things that you can do in GitHub Actions, right? There's thousands of individual workflows in the marketplace that let you do all sorts of fun things. And like Abel said, there's about 50 of them that touch Azure specific things, but there's limitless amounts of things that you can do once you start talking about the CLI. So, so we're about on time, right? So I think one of the things that is exciting that we want to just, call out, and I think Abel will say some things as he's wrapping up too, is, GitHub and Azure together are awesome. Right? I think that is fair to say. And I think that, taking a look at some of the actions that we've built out, I think that that's a ton of opportunity for folks to learn all sorts of the great things that you can do on both platforms.
Yeah, I agree. I'm a huge fan of actions. And I'm old, right? Which means I don't like change. I like my old tools and I don't want to do new things. Actions is just really, really slick. That the schema, I can't get over it. The YAML schema is super clean, which makes building these pipelines really easy for me. And then I love actions. I love being able to create my own custom actions and being able creating them and testing them super easy inside of GitHub as well. And of course, GitHub into Azure. Azure's my playground, man. I play in there every single day. You can do just about anything inside of there. So yeah, GitHub and Azure, that's a no-brainer to me.
And I wanted to finish on one note, because whenever I talk about DevOps, whenever I talk about GitHub Actions, I bring up this one particular thing, right? So GitHub Actions is awesome. There's one caveat to it. If you need to make a change or test out that action, what do you have to do? You got to commit that action back into your repo. And for a long time, I was very much like, why do I have to do this? There needs to be a tool that exists to allow me to run my actions locally. And wouldn't it be funny enough? There is an actual GitHub repository that's available on GitHub that allows you to run GitHub Actions locally. I have no affiliation with this person. I think Abel probably has no affiliation with this person. I'm just going to paste their GitHub repository into the chat. Basically, what it allows you to do is run GitHub Actions locally. So instead of having to worry about, commit after commit, oh, I missed a space in this YAML, it's not going to work, or oh, I did this with this, it doesn't work. Like, how many times have you just burned your loop trying to figure out, okay, this is a YAML problem, or this is a configuration problem, or whatever, right? Like, this tool, ACT, allows you to be able to run GitHub Actions locally. Again, I'm not affiliated with this person, and I just think it's an awesome tool. It's available on GitHub. It's open source. I think everybody should party with it if they want to. Yeah,
that's super cool, because that will speed up my inner loop when I'm building out these pipelines tremendously.
Awesome. Well, I think that about wraps us up for our Q&A. I want to thank everybody for hopping on. I want to thank Abel for joining, because, without Abel, we can't talk about DevOps, right? So did you want to close out and say anything before we head off?
Hey, man, let's try it out. Try out GitHub, try out Azure. What I really want you guys to do is try out these new deployment features. Let us know what you think. Because it's in beta. I think the public beta is on the 15th, is it? Something like that. Yeah. But try it out. Let us know what you think and give us feedback.
Yeah, we love our feedback. So that'll be it. Thank you for checking out the DevOps Q&A. Have a good one, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.